And then God help us all, the rise of trans rights, quote unquote, as an issue. I mean, I saw that from inside the belly of the beast at the Center for American Progress. So it's kind of like one moment nobody was talking about this. The next moment, everybody was 100% on board, and there was a special little, working group on it, and you could not even dream about questioning the idea that, in fact, I don't know if we really want to push this too much. And besides, I mean, isn't biological sex important? And you really couldn't raise those issues.
My guest today is Roy Teixeira, a data-driven political demographer who co-authored The Emerging Democratic Majority with John Judas in 2002. That book argued that Democrats enjoyed long-term electoral advantages from the changing demographics of America. Teixeira has since become a critic of the woke-era Democratic Party. We are going to discuss what happened to the party of the working class and how the culture of the party has fed into the culture wars.
I think it's really, really, really been terrible for the Democrats and for the left in general. And as I say, I'm not seeing too many signs yet that they're backing off.
Roy Teixeira, welcome to the podcast.
Hey, thanks for having me.
I mentioned some of your background in the introduction because I think it's very interesting to get to talk to someone who is conversant in this particular topic of the political dynamics, the political science of what's been happening.
Mhm.
For the benefit of our listeners, though, could you please tell us about yourself and how you came to a political science career? Because it turns out that you have an unusual origin story. You know, you can't be a superhero or a supervillain without an origin story. So, what is yours?
Well, okay. I started out as someone who came out of the 60s and 70s as, quite radical. I was even at one point a Maoist, though I gave up on that fairly quickly. But I nevertheless remained some kind of a Marxist. I went to graduate school, and actually, I'm a sociologist by training, not a political scientist. But you know, these disciplinary boundaries are a little arbitrary anyway, and I basically moved into thinking mostly about political science topics. But, I was a Marxist in graduate school, and then sort of gradually over time, I got disaffected with that, and I considered myself still on the left, but I Marxism, as one of my professors at Wisconsin put it, doesn't explain enough of the variance. So I became, more of a left liberal socialist type, I guess you could say. And in fact, that connects to something that's very much in the news today. I was one of the founding members of the Democratic Socialists of America, back when it was basically came out of the Michael Harrington tradition, the Democratic Socialist Organizing Committee, which merged with the New American Movement, which was more of a new left formation. But when I joined the DSA, it was very much influenced by the Harringtonish social democratic left wing of the possible kind of thing, very much very tied to the labor movement. Um, and over time, I kind of lost touch with them as I got out of grad school and built a career first in consulting and then in think tanks in Washington. And over time, I kept on trying to figure out ways that were based on actual data and the actual existing electorate of America, how you could actually uh, develop a coalition that would have some staying power that would do, more or less progressive things, make the country a better place. And again, that really comes a lot out of this social democratic tradition in Europe, though, of course, even then it was dying. And I kind of, as I say, evolved into the think tank world. I wrote a book on voter turnout, which was quite influential because I was basically taking exception to the Democrats' what, stupid idea in the late 80s that it was all about turnout. If they just turned out more of their favorite constituencies, they would win every election. And in fact, it didn't matter that they were alienating a lot of working class people. Does that sound familiar? Well, that debate goes all the way back to the end of the 1980s and the rise of the DLC. And actually, speaking of the DLC, I eventually moved into their orbit a little bit. And I worked at the Progressive Policy Institute for a while and wrote some stuff for them. And then I moved over to the Economic Policy Institute, which is kind of a left liberal economicsy kind of oriented place. And I was sort of their public opinion and politics guy. And eventually I moved out of that into the Century Foundation. And eventually from there, I sort of had a joint appointment. And this gets complicated with the Center for American Progress. But the bottom line there is I was actually an original employee of the Center for American Progress back when it was like a couple dozen people. And it was just being stood up by basically left philanthropist money and John Podesta. So I was at CAP all the way through, the most of the, I mean, it started in 2003. So it was like basically the 21st century from 2003 to 2022 when I left. And at that point, of course, the Democratic Party, to which I was oriented, and certainly CAP was, had gone through quite a transformation away from what I thought were faintly rational, at least somewhat rational politics toward politics that didn't seem very rational and certainly weren't very connected to the working class. And that sort of got me out of that whole 2002 space when I co-wrote The Emerging Democratic Majority, and thought the way the country was evolving was pretty consistent with the Democrats and a sort of progressive centrism if they could manage to stick to it, which of course they did not. Um, and I just became, as I say, increasingly disaffected. And from there, I moved over. When I quit CAP, I moved to the American Enterprise Institute because it was like, even though center right, and I'm not as right, particularly in economics, as some of the people there, I mean, nevertheless, a pluralistic place. People write books, they think, they talk, they debate. As you probably know, most of the so-called think tanks in Washington aren't think tanks at all. They're advocacy tanks. So it's a real breath of fresh air to be at AEI and be able to think and talk and write about what I wanted to. And again, always from, as you mentioned earlier, that sort of data-driven perspective. What do the data really say? What do the surveys really say? What are the what is the content of the shifting political coalitions? So that's a very short course and how I wound up going from, Marxist sociologist, Maoist to Marxist sociology grad student to democratic socialist to whatever I am now at AEI.
Not many people have worked for both the Center for American Progress and also the American Enterprise Institute. You've been in this game for a long time, and you've changed as people do,
Hmm.
and your position in the Overton window has changed as well.
Hmm.
I'm thinking of that cartoon that Colin Wright tweeted a couple of years ago with the little stick figures showing how the left has gotten extreme from his perspective. Um,
But that
Talk
he
about
hasn't
this.
changed much at all. Right. I mean, I think that is a lot the way I think about it. My underlying politics and commitments are not that different than they were at the beginning of the 21st century, but I think the party itself has changed quite dramatically.
James Carville, in particular, um, said a while ago that he was done working with pronoun people.
Hmm.
And now socialists are his red line. He's talking about a schism. Do you feel
Hmm.
excluded from the big tent these days?
Well, I mean, you can't be fired from the Democratic Party, I guess. But clearly my perspective is not, generally speaking, welcome in the Democratic Party today. I mean, I'm definitely on a sort of fringe. I mean, there are people in and around the Democratic Party who seek to promote a more heterodox, moderate politics. But even most of them are more partisan than I currently feel. And I think my view of the problems with the Democrats and the left tends to be, in a sense, more radical. That I think they're basically so far off what is reasonable, rational, and useful that there's not that much point to just being a partisan at this point. Things are going to have to change, and in ways we can only guess at before the Democrats or the Republicans are going to move back to a more common sense politics. So I think the standard view of the heterodox moderate people is yeah, I mean, bad things happened or things that happened shouldn't have happened. We said some things we shouldn't have said, the Democrats, but we're just on the verge of breaking through. I mean, Trump, everybody hates Trump. Republicans are on the run. If we just tweak things a little bit and don't rock the boat too much within our coalition, we will eventually we will come back into power and everything will be great. And I don't think that's right. I think the problems with the Democrats are quite fundamental. And it's not just that they made some mistakes, it's that a lot of stuff they bet their political capital on, not only are not popular, they're not even good ideas, They're they're not even things that would work for the country. They're bad ideas. They're pernicious, right? So I think that's a step most Democrats are still not willing to take to understand how radical the problems with the party are. They kind of slip back into partisanship and just wanting the Democrats to win. And I just can't look at things that way anymore because I think, as I say, the problems are too fundamental. Um, yeah, I know that space very well, the people in and around the moderate wing of the Democratic Party, and I can tell you, I mean, they'll talk to me. I mean, it's not like they won't talk to me, but they're definitely not willing to go as far as I am in terms of look. I mean, look what happened to the Liberal Patriot, which was the Substack I did with John Halpin and Michael Baharian. That was, took a fairly hard-hitting perspective toward the problems with the Democrats and tried to justify them with data and clear analysis. And basically, after an initial tranche of funding from some Democratic-oriented donors, it all dried up. Nobody wanted to support us anymore because I really believe, in a sense, what we said was too radical, and we were too not partisan for the Republicans, but not partisan enough toward the Democrats. And I think the Democratic donor verse is still basically not oriented toward anything that's particularly radical and far-reaching in terms of changing the culture and priorities of the party. So they basically said, nope, no more money for you. And we had to close our doors, uh, which is, not terrible. It gives me more time to think about longer range and bigger picture things. It's hard writing a column every week, but apparently a lot of people miss it. So what could we do?
I really enjoyed that Substack, and I do miss it. And in 2002, you and John Judas argued in The Emerging Democratic Majority that the movement to a post-industrial society was changing the electorate in ways that Democrats needed to take advantage of and
Hmm.
that have, sort of fulminated or culminated. The idea then was that the New Deal is going away. That old Democratic Party is dead, and this is the new thing. And in that book, you recognized a couple of trends that deserve to be broken down a bit. First
Hmm.
is the growth of college-educated professionals in these dynamic urban areas, which you called ideopolises. Um, I'm just wondering, do you now see those ideopolises as a problem? Because this is how we get cities run by DSA socialist idiots who've never had a job in their lives and Congress critters who've been professional students for decades and so on.
Yeah.
Do you see that as a cultural problem for Democrats?
Well, the short answer is yes. I mean, when I look back at the arguments John Judas and I made in that 2002 book, I think we did get a lot of things right. Uh, Certainly about the demographic changes that were taking place in the country and how they would, in the short run at least, maybe the medium run, advantage the Democrats, and that would start putting in the way these ideopolises were growing and the movement of college-educated professionals toward the Democrats. All that would conspire to put certain states and areas into the Democratic column that had not previously been there. But a couple of things about that one, maybe we didn't emphasize enough, and I think the second we just didn't really anticipate or understand well enough. The first is we talked actually very specifically in one section of the book about the political weight of the white working class and how Democrats were becoming increasingly estranged from that constituency, and they really couldn't afford to lose much more support among that group. So they had to be very attentive to that wing of their coalition and not go too far in any direction that might alienate these voters further, and that was basically widely ignored. I mean, that this coalition we envisioned coming into being, I mean, it wasn't just blacks and Hispanics, and it wasn't just professionals, and it wasn't just, single and educated women or whatever. It's also, I mean, a significant part of the white working class and the white working class areas of the country where they figure prominently. You just couldn't afford to lose that much altitude among that group. So that's something we said and people ignored. The second thing, though, gets to what you mentioned, you were asking about the professionals, the rise of the ideopolises. We were actually completely correct that this would actually these groups and areas would move in the direction of the Democrats. Boy, did that turn out to be true. I mean, even more so than we thought. But what we didn't understand and underestimated the potential for is that the culture and priorities that would produce in the party would actually pretty much turn the party away from the white working class in general and open up real vulnerabilities for the party. We didn't anticipate that the professional class liberals who would come to dominate the party would be quite so radical in terms of their cultural outlook and the things they thought Democrats needed to stand for. And that goes from race and immigration and climate and gender, all these things that have loomed so large in the contemporary Democratic Party, and I might add, and so even social democratic parties in Europe. We just didn't anticipate the professionals as a group would have such hegemony within the party and drive these things forward and make them so important to the image of the party. That was something we just didn't anticipate. And of course, that completely undercuts any kind of quote unquote progressive centrism and basically undercuts the appeal of Democrats to normie working class voters who think, what on earth are these people talking about? So yeah, that's the whenever you make I mean, in any kind of forecast, even implicit, there's always a danger that things will develop in a way that you just couldn't really think about at the time. And I think that was true about the radicalization of the professionals. But we knew they'd be important. We knew they'd support the Democrats. It was pretty clear. But how radical they would become over time was not something we anticipated.